British Vogue just dropped its inaugural Best Dressed list, and with one quiet move, it drew a very loud line. Sitting right at the top was the Princess of Wales. Calm, unbothered, front-row energy without even trying. But that wasn't the moment that made people pause. The real pause came seconds later when Vogue released a second list, 55 of the most stylish A-listers shaping culture right now. Actors, designers, musicians, insiders, everyone had a lane, everyone had a title, and one name people expected to see simply wasn't there: Meghan Markle. No ranking, no honorable mention, not even a footnote. And when a magazine like Vogue goes silent, that silence isn't accidental, it's deliberate. Because in fashion, being ignored is louder than being criticized. A door didn't slam, it closed softly, and that's how power moves. Now here's the part most people miss. This wasn't about dresses. Vogue wasn't judging hems, heels, or color palettes. They made that very clear. This list wasn't about what you wear. It was about who you are when you wear it. Vogue was looking for people who shape culture without chasing it, people who don't announce their influence because the influence speaks first. In this world, style isn't loud, it's controlled. It's confidence without explanation. Vogue doesn't reward noise, it rewards restraint. And once you understand that, the list starts reading less like fashion news and more like a power map. Who gets invited, who gets trusted, and who no longer fits the room. And then there was Catherine, not just included, crowned. Vogue didn't just place her at the top, they gave her a title that matters, an eternal influencer. That's not trendy, that's permanent. She was positioned alongside names that don't beg for relevance because they built it. Kate Moss, Naomi Campbell, Victoria Beckham, icons whose influence didn't need rebranding. Vogue praised Catherine's love of vintage fashion, her loyalty to British designers, and her almost uncanny ability to change a brand's fate by wearing it once. No press tour, no manifesto, just quiet consistency. They even noted that her influence is expected to grow, especially as she steps into the role of issuing royal warrants. Translation: her presence doesn't just move fashion, it moves money, slowly, calmly, inevitably. And that's when the contrast became impossible to ignore. One woman rose without asking, another didn't even get acknowledged. And suddenly, this wasn't a fashion story anymore. It was a lesson in how power really works, and who still has it. Here's where the story stops being emotional and starts being financial, because Catherine's placement at the top of Vogue's list wasn't just symbolic, it was economic. What insiders called the Kate effect isn't a compliment, it's a measurable force. Brands she wears sell out within hours. Designers see spikes they can trace directly back to a single appearance. The impact is estimated in the billions, and that's not hype, that's market behavior. Vogue understands this language fluently. They don't crown people because they're liked, they crown people because they move systems. Catherine doesn't chase fashion houses. Fashion houses quietly hope for a nod. And what makes her even more valuable is what she doesn't do. No chaos, no drama, no overexposure, just consistency, restraint, and trust. From Vogue's perspective, that isn't just style, that's stability. And stability is everything when you're deciding who gets long-term influence and who gets phased out. Now, circle back to that second list, 55 names, each one carefully placed. Amal Clooney praised for committing to a look, musicians recognized for shaping sound and style, actors celebrated for eccentricity and confidence. Even the men had their own lane. Everyone was accounted for. Everyone had a reason for being there, and Meghan still wasn't. This wasn't about forgetting her. Vogue doesn't forget people of her stature. This was about exclusion, about not seeing a clear lane anymore. In elite circles, lists like this are less about popularity and more about definition. Who are you right now? What do you represent? What do you bring that lasts? Vogue didn't explain her absence because they didn't need to. Silence is how institutions communicate when the answer is already settled, and the message was simple. Even if it was uncomfortable, whatever Meghan represents at this stage, Vogue no longer considers it cultural authority. And this is where the quiet rejection turned sharp. According to sources close to the situation, Meghan didn't wait to be invited back into Vogue's pages. She reached out, but what arrived wasn't a pitch, it was a set of conditions. A full-feature, major placement, creative control, approval over images, quotes, and narrative. In other words, she didn't want collaboration, she wanted command. And that's where the line was drawn. Vogue works with powerful women all the time, but there's a rule they rarely break. The magazine controls the story. Even global icons don't dictate editorial authority. Insiders say the tone of the request raised eyebrows, not because it was ambitious, but because it felt entitled. Vogue isn't in the business of image rehabilitation. They don't rescue reputations, they protect their own. And when faced with a figure whose public image has become polarizing, demanding control instead of trust, Vogue did what it always does in moments like this. It declined, politely, quietly, firmly. And in the fashion world, a polite no is louder than a public rejection. It's the sound of access being withdrawn. There was a time when Meghan's presence felt intriguing, new, slightly untouchable, but mystique is fragile, and once it's gone, it doesn't come back easily. In elite fashion and media circles, overexposure isn't visibility, it's erosion. The more the public hears the same themes, the same explanations, the same carefully managed messaging, the less powerful it becomes. Vogue thrives on distance, on unanswered questions, on letting the image breathe. And somewhere along the way, Meghan's story stopped breathing. Every appearance felt strategic. Every smile felt rehearsed. Every moment felt like it was trying to say something instead of simply being something. Fashion doesn't reward effort you can see. Fashion rewards effort you never notice. And when mystery turns into predictability, even the most powerful platforms begin to step back. Stepping away from the royal family was supposed to open doors. Freedom, opportunity, reinvention. Instead, it revealed something far less glamorous. How much influence had been built into the institution itself. Outside the palace walls, the safety net disappeared. Media deals promised a reset, but delivered mixed results. Projects launched with global anticipation, only to fade without the staying power expected. Behind the scenes, relationships cooled, invitations slowed, support became conditional. The truth is uncomfortable but simple. The authority Meghan once carried didn't belong solely to her. It flowed through proximity to the crown. Without it, every move required more effort for less return. Freedom came, yes, but so did isolation. And in industries that value stability, isolation is risky. This is where the story widens beyond fashion and becomes something deeper. Attention is loud. It trends, spikes, and disappears. Favor is quiet. It doesn't announce itself, but it decides outcomes. Institutions don't chase attention. They protect favor. That's why silence from Vogue matters. That's why the monarchy never rushes to respond. Power that lasts doesn't argue, it waits. Catherine's influence grows because it's aligned with systems that move slowly and deliberately. Meghan's struggle isn't about talent or ambition, it's about positioning. Once you step into conflict with the very structures that elevated you, attention may follow, but favor does not. And without favor, doors don't slam, they simply stop opening. In the end, this isn't about who dressed better, it's about how two paths led to two very different outcomes. One woman learned to wait, to listen, to let institutions speak for her. She didn't rush relevance, she became inevitable. The other pushed forward, demanding space, demanding control, demanding to be heard, and learned that power doesn't respond well to pressure. Vogue didn't choose sides loudly. It didn't need to. It crowned one and quietly passed on the other. And that decision says more than any headline ever could. Because influence doesn't vanish overnight. It shifts, it settles, it chooses where it wants to live. And right now, it's clear where it feels most comfortable. This isn't an ending, it's a pause, a recalibration, and the real question isn't who Vogue crowned this time, it's who will understand the lesson before the next door closes just as quietly. Some moments don't announce themselves. They simply arrive and change the temperature of the room. British Vogue's first ever global best dressed list did exactly that. No screaming headlines, no dramatic commentary, just one name placed at the top with surgical precision: Princess Catherine, calm, centered, unmoved. Vogue didn't describe her as trendy or experimental. They crowned her a global style icon, a title that doesn't expire with seasons. And that alone would have been enough to spark conversation. But the real signal came after. A second list followed: 55 cultural tastemakers, actors, designers, musicians, power players, every category accounted for, every lane filled, except one. Meghan Markle was nowhere to be found. No ranking, no honorable mention, no explanation. And in the world Vogue controls, silence is never accidental. It's intentional. Fashion doesn't shout when it wants to make a point. It withdraws, and withdrawal is power. This wasn't about fabric or tailoring. Vogue made that clear between the lines. This list wasn't judging outfits. It was judging presence. Who shapes culture without asking permission? Who carries influence without explaining it? Real style authority isn't loud. It doesn't campaign. It doesn't clarify. It simply exists and lets others adjust around it. That's the difference between attention and favor. Attention can be chased. Favor must be earned and then protected. Vogue doesn't reward noise. It rewards restraint. And restraint is something Catherine has mastered quietly for over a decade. She doesn't announce designers. She doesn't explain choices. She wears something once and watches it sell out worldwide. No interviews, no personal branding speeches, just consistency. That's why Vogue's language mattered. Eternal influencer, not trending, not viral, permanent. Now here's where the contrast becomes unavoidable. One woman placed at the top without asking, the other not placed at all. And suddenly, this stops being fashion commentary and starts reading like a power audit. Vogue wasn't asking who is liked, they were asking who lasts. Catherine's influence moves markets, not timelines. Designers wait for her. Brands rise because of her. Money follows quietly. Vogue understands this language better than anyone. They don't crown people emotionally, they crown them strategically. And Catherine fits institutions. She doesn't disrupt them, she strengthens them. That makes her safe, valuable, reliable. Meanwhile, omission speaks louder than rejection. Vogue didn't criticize Meghan. They didn't need to. Criticism keeps someone relevant. Silence phases them out. In elite media spaces, absence is a message. It says the lane is unclear, the identity is unstable, the influence no longer feels aligned. And when institutions feel uncertainty, they don't debate, they disengage. If you're noticing this shift, pause for a second and ask yourself who benefits when fashion becomes quiet instead of reactive. And if you're seeing the pattern form, make sure you're subscribed because this story only gets sharper from here. What makes this moment so revealing isn't just who Vogue elevated, but how quietly they did it. There was no victory lap, no pointed commentary, no dramatic comparison. Catherine didn't need to be defended, and Meghan didn't need to be criticized. Institutions at this level rarely explain themselves because explanation suggests uncertainty. Vogue simply acted, and in doing so, clarified the hierarchy without saying a word. That's how long-standing power prefers to move. Inside fashion houses, editors talk less about trends and more about trust. Who can be relied on not to turn a campaign into controversy? Who won't hijack a moment meant to spotlight the work? Who understands that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is disappear and let the clothes, the brand, or the moment speak? Catherine has mastered that instinctively. She doesn't chase relevance. She creates space for it to find her. This is why designers feel safe with her. One appearance can change a brand's trajectory, not because of hype, but because buyers trust the signal. There's no backlash risk, no unpredictable narrative shift, no need for damage control. Vogue recognizes that kind of reliability instantly. They don't call it boring, they call it bankable, and bankable influence is rare. Meghan's situation sits on the opposite end of that spectrum. Her public image has become reactive instead of gravitational. Every move feels like a response to something else, a correction, a reframing, a rebuttal. And while that keeps attention alive, it erodes confidence behind the scenes. Brands and institutions don't want to manage reactions. They want to amplify moments. The difference is subtle, but it's everything. There's also the question of alignment. Vogue is not just a fashion magazine. It's an institution that protects its relationships with designers, advertisers, royal families, and cultural gatekeepers across continents. Aligning with someone in open conflict with a centuries-old institution requires calculation. Is the return worth the friction? Right now, Vogue's answer appears to be no, not because Meghan lacks visibility, but because visibility alone doesn't equal value. Meanwhile, Catherine's alignment feels effortless. She represents continuity, stability, a future that looks predictable in the best way possible. As she moves closer to issuing royal warrants, her influence becomes not just cultural, but structural. That's the level Vogue is interested in. Influence that doesn't spike and crash, but compounds over time. This is where the story becomes less about personal rivalry and more about systems. One woman chose integration, patience, and silence. The other chose speed, autonomy, and control. Neither path is morally right or wrong, but only one aligns with how legacy institutions operate. Vogue didn't invent this rule, they simply enforce it. And this enforcement sends a message far beyond fashion. It tells every public figure watching that attention can be loud and fleeting, but favor is quiet and enduring. You don't demand favor, you earn it slowly, often invisibly. When you try to rush it, doors don't slam, they stop opening. That's the lesson unfolding here, whether anyone wants to admit it or not. The final section is where everything converges, because by now the pattern is impossible to miss. This was never a sudden rejection or a dramatic fall. It was a gradual recalibration happening in plain sight. Vogue didn't wake up one morning and decide to favor Catherine over Meghan. That decision has been forming for years, shaped by consistency, behavior, and alignment with power structures that move far slower than headlines. Legacy institutions think in decades, not news cycles. They invest in figures who won't force them to constantly explain, defend, or course-correct. Catherine fits that model almost unnervingly well. Her public life follows a rhythm that institutions recognize and reward: preparation, patience, restraint, and an understanding that not every moment belongs to you. When Vogue crowned her a global style icon, they weren't predicting a trend, they were acknowledging an inevitability. What makes this especially striking is how little Catherine had to do to earn it. No reinvention arcs, no public grievances, no attempts to reshape the narrative. She let time do the work. In elite circles, that's seen as maturity. Power that doesn't rush signals confidence. Vogue didn't elevate her because she needed validation. They elevated her because she no longer needs it. Meghan's trajectory, by contrast, reflects a different philosophy of influence, one rooted in immediacy. Speak now, control the narrative, own the platform. That approach works exceptionally well in digital media, where speed and visibility are currency. But it clashes with institutions that see control as something you surrender before you're allowed inside. Vogue isn't impressed by leverage, they're impressed by discretion. This is why the reported request for editorial control mattered so much. It wasn't the ambition that raised concerns, it was the misunderstanding. At that level, power is demonstrated by trusting the institution, not directing it. When someone arrives with conditions instead of confidence, it signals insecurity, even unintentionally. Vogue doesn't punish that publicly, they simply disengage. The silence that followed was not accidental, it was instructional. In elite media, silence is how doors close without scandal. No rebuttals, no leaks, just absence. And absence, when it's deliberate, reshapes perception faster than criticism ever could. People begin asking different questions, not why was she a pact, but why wasn't she included? Meanwhile, Catherine's presence grows without effort. Her fashion influence expands organically. Designers benefit, British labels thrive. Economic impact follows. Vogue tracks those outcomes closely. They don't reward potential, they reward results, and the results speak clearly. In the end, this story isn't about fashion or favoritism. It's about how power decides where it feels safe. Catherine represents continuity, predictability, and institutional harmony. Meghan represents disruption, autonomy, and narrative control. One is embraced by legacy systems, the other exists outside them. Neither is inherently wrong, but only one aligns with how magazines like Vogue operate. So when British Vogue crowned Catherine and quietly passed on Meghan, they weren't making a statement about worth, they were making a statement about fit. Influence doesn't disappear, it relocates. It chooses environments that sustain it. And right now, Vogue has made it very clear where it believes lasting influence belongs.